So always one of the topics of discussion is the migrant situation, right? And what's going on. New president, and we're sort of in that transition phase right now, right? And everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen, right? My question to you is, are the people's concerns being heard? Are they being heard? Not the people spewing hatred. We're never talking about them. They're going to hate you just because you're different. We're not talking about them. We're talking about the people who have genuine concerns about the homeless, concerns about the veterans, the ones who aren't receiving any types of assistance, people who are not upset about people coming here legally and doing it the right way. I'm asking, are their concerns being heard? That's what we need to know right now. This video here is Migrants Flood NYC to Avoid Trump Deportations. This is by Cash Joy. Let's check it out.
Fox News is projecting former President Donald Trump has won the 2024 presidential election.
As of now, Fox News projecting Trump currently has 277 electoral college votes.
So Trump won the election, and that's going to come as a big surprise to most of New York, which voted 55% in favor of Vice President Harris. But even though Trump won, many progressive policies heavily supported in New York City itself, like liberal immigration laws, go against the platform he got elected on and may govern from. Which means that some really strange things are going to start happening here, especially concerning the asylum crisis.
Look what happened. Is this crazy?
President-elect Trump celebrating victory in the presidential race.
This is about 20 minutes ago. The AP declared Trump the winner over Vice President Kamala Harris.
The greatest comeback in American political history. I mean, we've never seen anything like this.
With the arrival of more than 200,000 migrants to the Big Apple, New York City has spent more than $5 billion on the migrant crisis.
New York and New Jersey, blue states, how might these election results be felt in our area?
That's the story of the whole election, is that Donald Trump did better in Democratic areas than he did last time around.
A new warning about a dangerous Venezuelan prison gang making deeper inroads in the U.S. The Department of Homeland Security says members of the notorious Tren de Aragua gang are increasingly drawn to sanctuary cities.
I mentioned how President-elect Trump outperformed his 2020 numbers even in blue areas. Let's put a finer point on that. In 2020, he lost New Jersey by about 16 points. This year, he lost New Jersey by about 5 points.
So I would expect that Democrats are going to continue to try and run to the right, they're going to try and run to the middle, and they're going to try and be the moderate or centrist party. But they got some work cut out for them, because I think many people tie the Democrats to the far left.
So Donald Trump has defied the odds and become president of this country once again. But what nobody's talking about is that this totally changes New York City's relationship with our federal government, and it's going to have a massive impact on immigration, but not in the way most people think. Because in many ways, New York City is and remains the focal point of the asylum crisis here in America. And when this crisis first began, Mayor Adams was initially receptive to the idea of thousands of folks coming here to seek a better life. But after thousands came, thousands more decided to do the exact same thing, and as of right now, we've got over 212,000 people who've come to New York fleeing poverty, seeking the American dream. And because of New York City's generous right to shelter rules, everyone's been offered a free place to stay, which is great because it's kept families from having to live out on the street, but it hasn't exactly been sustainable, which is why many of those same families are now being evicted from New York's shelter system. And since that shelter system isn't helping people get jobs, many of these folks are just as homeless now as they were before they moved in, and they certainly haven't achieved the American dream, which was the whole point of this process. But the real reason a Donald Trump presidential victory represents a huge challenge for New York is because this is still a sanctuary city, and as such, it's going to continue to be a destination not just for people wishing to emigrate to America, but also for people who want to come here because they can hide from federal immigration authorities. And as you're about to see, New York City could soon become one of the last places in America where folks at odds with our nation's laws will be able to stay. And with pockets of gang activity spreading across our country already, not just in New York, but in other places like Colorado and Texas, there exists the possibility that New York City, with its sanctuary doors wide open, will still see continued migration, not from well-meaning individuals, but from those who have a criminal past and the desire for a crime-filled future. Which is bad news, not just for New Yorkers, but also for the 65,000 asylum seekers still living here. So here we are, Trump Tower. That's the front entrance. It's about 12 o'clock the day after the election. And it's not too crazy. No protesters, nothing wild, no megaphones, no crowds. But some people here might start doing that once the new president takes over and starts doing things that they disagree with.
New York and New Jersey, blue states, how might these election results be felt in our area?
In New York, there's actually a number of congressional seats that seem to have gone from Republican to Democrat. And right now, that's the last chance that the Democrats have to hold on to any of the House. They lost the Senate, they lost the presidency. So that could be a big deal nationally.
So according to the official results, as a state, New York voted 55% in favor of Vice President Harris. New York is not a state that voted for President Trump. For reference, in 2016, Hillary Clinton won New York State with 59% of the vote, and President Biden outperformed Hillary, winning over 60% of the vote in New York. Which means that even though Donald Trump may have won a stunning victory, and even though this may be one of the greatest political comebacks of all time, he didn't win New York at all. He lost. He lost by just about as much as he always loses. And what that means is many of the people here do not want Trump laws. They do not want Trump policies. They do not want to see him govern on the platform that he ran upon. That's for sure. And as a sanctuary city, New York itself already exists in opposition.
That's interesting, though, because a lot of the videos that I've checked out, a lot of people had issues with the crime. A lot of people had issues with how things were being handled, the assistance programs, different things. There were so many different issues, bro. I heard from the people. This isn't just something I'm just pulling out the air. People were actually voicing their concerns about what was going on in the situations, the parks being flooded with people, the schools and around the schools being flooded with people, and how the homeless were being treated. Like, there were so many different things. So to hear that, it just seems so contradictory, or somewhere or something is doing something to change things, or the truth isn't getting out, or some kind of way something is going on here. Something's not right.
Somewhat to federal laws it doesn't like, and it's been doing that for all 4 years of the past presidential administration, which many say is the reason the asylum crisis here looks the way it does. Remember, this all started here back in 2022, and it really started growing in 2023, and we've still got around 65,000 individuals living in our shelter system, which is supposed to be helping them become sufficient, but is failing in that mission because it's not part of a greater purpose of actually connecting these people with jobs and the future. Many of them were promised when they moved in. Instead,
and then a lot of things happened where they started turning into squatters and all kind of stuff. Like, so it's not making sense to me why people are either upset or what, or who are they polling with these numbers? That's the case as well. Maybe that's where it goes wrong.
All our shelter system has really provided people with is the opportunity to fill out asylum paperwork and not much else. However, our right to shelter rules, they're not going away anytime soon. Those were not on our recent ballots. That was not something that's been voted on. And even if a new president does come in and close our borders completely, there are still thousands of people in this country right now with legal permission to be here, waiting for their asylum cases to play out. And unfortunately, there are also quite a few people in this country that have ties to dangerous criminal organizations. We're talking at least 600 known associates of a dangerous Venezuelan gang. Tren de Aragua is the name of it, which started in a prison in that country a few years ago. And that gang is now here. There have been reports of gang members living in some of the city's own funded shelters that are supposed to help asylum seekers, creating a situation here that's not only very bad for the people the asylum crisis is named after, because they can't actually get the help they need or achieve anything if gang members with weapons control where they live and exploit them, but this is also a potential problem for New York because of how popular Donald Trump now is on a national level. He didn't just win an electoral victory, he also won the popular vote. It's very likely that he could govern on what he ran on, and some in New York may see this as an opportunity to oppose that by doubling down on sanctuary-type policies that don't actually help people who really need it.
While we're speaking of New York and New Jersey, are you surprised to see the actual total numbers? Usually these are obviously tried and true blue states.
That's the story of the whole election.
election is that Donald Trump did better in Democratic areas than he did last time around. And it wasn't an enormous change most of the places. It was 2 or 3 percentage points. But the race and the electorate is so divided that's all.
So the key word, unfortunately, here is division. New York is very divided from how many states and many voters feel about our upcoming new president. And that's probably only going to become even more apparent as 2025 rolls around and he takes office for the second time. And even though the asylum crisis as a whole may change with less people entering the country through ports of entry or through the borders, it is ridiculous to think that cities like New York with progressive leaders won't rise up in opposition to that in some way, potentially passing policies that don't exactly make the asylum crisis better, even though they claim to. Like our right to shelter policy, which doesn't actually help people. Yes, it lets you move into a former hotel or into one of the gigantic tents out on Randall's Island, but it just does that. It's not actually helping people get on their feet and achieve the American dream, yet it exists. And it's something Republicans complain about. So maybe more of that will keep happening, even though.
See, so there's no plan. There's no plan in place once they get you into a free shelter. There's no, okay, then the next step is this. Then the next step is this. Then you do this. And then you go from there. No, it's just get you into a place. And then after that, it cuts off. So eventually you're back out on the street trying to figure it out. And then they resort to crime. That's what's literally happening.
No, it's not actually benefiting the very people who move into those shelters. Again, these are dangerous environments in many cases. Police are banned from going inside of them because this is a sanctuary city. So our local law enforcement that has plenty of resources to keep the president safe with all these checkpoints and stuff over here, they're not allowed to go into our shelters and patrol them looking for people who might be breaking the law. They're only allowed in if they've got a warrant for a specific individual. And what this does is this creates places that are more akin to like a minimum security prison because you've got gang members who are actually in charge in there, not law enforcement, not the city. And this is not hyperbole either. It's out there for everyone who wants to see and look at it. New York's sanctuary status is actually aiding people who aren't here to help anybody but themselves in an illegal manner. And these are the results of bad policies, not because the asylum seekers themselves are bad, absolutely not, but because bad people are allowed to take advantage of laws that aren't protecting those who really need it. But sadly, the right to shelter system will probably remain in its current state, not actually doing anything to help people, and some here will brag about it as a badge of pride because in their minds they're resisting tyranny and standing up for democracy against a president they dislike. And with 55% of the state voting the way that they have pretty much in every other presidential election, the politics of New Yorkers as a whole aren't realigning, even though some political analysts are predicting that there will be a movement towards the center from those who may have previously been associated with left-leaning policies.
I think the next thing is going to be when Trump takes office and he decides whether or not he decides to close the border. If people know that day is coming, they're going to be flooding those borders up until that day now. So you'll probably see a huge increase now of more migrants coming in because they know at some point in time that border may be closed off. So I got to get in there now while I can.
See a change coming to how people run elections now going forward, even next November?
So, one of the interesting things is that I can use the New Jersey 7th congressional district as an example. The candidate, the Democrat, she was very, very progressive and very, very left. She tried to run to the middle and didn't get there fast enough, and she lost. So I would expect that Democrats are going to continue to try and run to the right. They're going to try and run to the middle, and they're going to...
Yeah, nothing that New York City does in the near future is going to change any of that. I don't think there's going to be much of a realignment here at all, and that's because many of our notable elected officials were able to win by landslide margins without changing anything. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she won 70-30, which means she was more popular in her own district than Vice President Harris was on a state level. And she's going to be under a lot of pressure because as Donald Trump starts his second presidential term and starts doing things, there won't be too many progressive voices of opposition if people start moderating operating like they very well may in other parts of the country. Many of our local progressive leaders will be looked at as the voice of reason, and local progressives probably aren't going to change their positions on anything from immigration to inflation to jobs to taxes. Nope. And as far as local politics here goes, I don't think you're going to have this running to the center, so to speak. It might actually be the opposite. You may have people take more extreme positions than they did in the past because there is so much national progressive pressure, but it can only go to those who still hold views that are in direct opposition to what people in many parts of the country, including swing states, voted against. And there's going to be a lot of people in New York who see their beliefs as a counterbalance to what they think is a problem for America. And there's still a large portion of the traditional media world that is very upset with this Trump victory. Up until election night, he wasn't supposed to win this thing. He was actually down in polling. That slowly started to change after the votes came in and were counted, but 538, that's what the most reputable polling thing out there. Well, that guy, Nate Silver, he's thrown out his model saying that it doesn't accurately predict elections, and he was supposed to be one of the most accurate. But hopefully something can be done to help the actual asylum seekers, because we've still got 65,000 of them living in shelters, and they're not being prepared in any way to reach for what New York said they were going to get when they moved in. Many of them are now so homeless that they're living in tents outside of the shelters where they moved into, and they have to do that because they have to go back to the shelters to get their mail, and the mail contains their asylum information. So we'll have to see what happens with that. We've still got a very big humanitarian crisis on our hands here in New York, and it's a problem that's probably not going to get fixed through political stuff, because that's what brought it here. It needs to start helping actual people. But what do you think about that? How would you go about fixing New York City's asylum crisis? And do you think that a lot of people are going to be asked to leave the country? Do you think many asylum applications are going to get denied? Do you think New York is going to see more migration from folks who may have been told to leave the country and don't want to, and come here specifically because this is a sanctuary city? And how is that going to impact the legitimate goals of real asylum seekers, who are the vast majority of these folks to begin with? Let me know what you think.
Data shows that 911 emergencies are continuing to rise each year across the city. But EMS workers say that there's not enough resources to keep up.
My ambulance, I haven't seen it in at least well over 6 months.
So if you're experiencing an emergency, the ambulance coming to save you may not arrive as quickly as one would hope. And while some are blaming traffic congestion for shortages of available ambulances, others say those shortages are because New York City's experiencing more 911 calls than it has in a long time. But one thing's for sure, these shortages of ambulances, they're coming at the worst possible time for New York City.
Glendon Hill neighbors came out in numbers to draw attention to their safety concerns. I spoke with neighbors concerned about the increased litter, noise, and fights outside the two shelters.
10 years ago, it took EMS 9.6 minutes on average to get to a life-threatening call. The response time now 12.4 minutes. The FDNY's response to medical emergencies has nearly doubled.
Local families are terrified of the threat of more attacks, assaults, as are the residents of that shelter.
In Brooklyn, life-threatening emergencies have increased by 15.7% since 2021. It's the highest increase in the city.
This part's getting bad. We all know that it's getting bad.
Obviously, if you come out late night, something might happen.
There have been plenty of recent signs of how bad things have been getting. There's also what locals describe as a constant presence of loitering. 8th Avenue in Manhattan is getting attention, but for the wrong reasons.
EMS union boss Oren Barzilay says delivery trucks and bike lanes are part of the problem.
If the response time is over 10 minutes for those types of calls, your next option for our crews will be probably take them to the morgue.
So New York is experiencing an enormous rise in life-threatening emergencies, yet there aren't enough ambulances to go around. But what nobody's talking about is many of those emergencies have a lot to do with the types of dangerous behavior we as a city have decided we're just going to let slide with no consequences, revealing that our ambulance shortage might not be as complicated as some people think it is. Yes, traffic congestion here is a massive issue, and yes, there have been reports of rising gang violence in our asylum shelters and on our streets. But the overwhelming majority of asylum seekers who've come to New York are not here committing crimes or hurting others. And as it turns out, traffic congestion also isn't to blame for this, even though the roads are packed with cars. Instead, those traffic jams are the fault of environmentally friendly yet flawed road redesigns that create unnecessary gridlock. Also, as you'll soon see, the lack of available life-saving ambulances would probably be lower if assaults, which result in 911 calls, weren't higher than they've been in quite some time. In fact, physical violence on our streets is now so bad, New York's former governor, David Patterson, who's 70 years old, was recently assaulted by a gang while walking his dog. And one of those arrested turns out to be a New York City employee who's got a job working for the MTA. On top of that, NYPD data shows assaults citywide are up 5% this year and 40% over the last 5 years, making it clear our city has an out-of-control safety problem that's been growing since before the asylum crisis became a crisis. Which brings us to the real reason.
So they just stacking crisis on top of crisis on top of crisis there, bro. I feel for New York. I used to want to live there. I had done research to go live there, bro. White Plains, New York. I didn't want to be in the heart of New York and the city and everything. I kind of wanted to get to the outskirts, so we were looking there, but bro, I feel for y'all.
We've now got an ambulance shortage in this city. Yes, we've got rising violence. Yes, we've got crazy traffic, but decisions made by our leaders have been making those two problems worse for a very long time. Because as you're about to see, our revolving door justice system that releases dangerous repeat criminals who assault others is one thing, but it's quite another for city planners to build things that create traffic jams on purpose just to disincentivize driving. Which, if you look around, obviously isn't working, and now our ambulances that are trying to rescue people in our progressive high crime environment can't do it because they're stuck in bumper to bumper traffic. You know traffic's bad when the guy on the city bike can't even get through. But all this gridlock, it's a nightmare not just for drivers and commuters, but also for emergency vehicles, because even though they've got sirens and lights, they can turn them on all they want, but with all of this bumper-to-bumper traffic, there's really no way for them to get through, and that's a huge problem, leading to increased delays when emergency services try to come and save somebody. But not only do they have more work to do because we're living in an environment where there are more 911 calls than ever before for a variety of reasons, this traffic congestion has actually been made worse by city planners on purpose.
EMS union boss Orrin Barzilay says delivery trucks and bike lanes are part of the problem.
If the response time is over 10 minutes for those types of calls, your next option for our crews will be probably take them to the...
So this is extremely important because the EMS supervisor mentions two big problems: delivery vehicles and bike lanes, which you can see we're still putting down out here. But in order to add this bike lane and this pedestrian walkway that two people are standing in right now, the city had to give up 2 lanes that could have been used to improve the flow of traffic headed north. Look, see this ambulance right here? It's so big that it has to ride on the road. It can't take a shortcut and get itself through the bike lane here. It's not gonna happen. It's just sitting in traffic. But you know who else is forbidden from using these pedestrian walkways? Those delivery vehicles, and that's a big issue because look at this place. We got businesses over here, we got businesses over here, we got buildings. These places need supplies. Those get dropped off in big trucks. Where's that truck gonna park? They're not allowed to park out here in all this empty space. Oh no, don't do that. Nope, they gotta park over there in the street where you only have 3 lanes, obstructing one of those lanes, and now you're down to 2 lanes. It's an absolute disaster. Now, it's important to understand that before we get into how rising violence might be contributing to increasing 911 calls, that you understand this recent road redesign wasn't supposed to be a problem because of congestion pricing, which is what these toll readers are for, but it's been put on pause. However, proponents of this plan to tax every single car on the road thought that it was going to be the savior of our traffic problems, at least in Manhattan anyways, because people were going to have to pay a significant amount of money every single day just to have a vehicle on the road here. But
now I see why people in New York say what's the use of owning a car? Why own a car? If you got to deal with this, why even own a car? You probably get somewhere faster on a moped or something like that than actually having a car, bro. That's crazy to me.
reason congestion pricing's been shut down is because not only was it going to create more traffic problems elsewhere, many people deemed it completely unaffordable for the everyday working man. But if you think this is stupid and absolutely ridiculous, put your seatbelt on because it's about to get even worse, and we still haven't got to any of the issues that are causing the volume of 911 calls our EMS services are getting to go through the roof.
You can look no further than 34th Street for bus lane violations. People driving and parking and double parking in the bus lane, but come Monday, that could all change with fines in the mail. This New York City traffic.
So not only have we made the roads smaller by adding in bike lanes that supposedly protect cyclists from traffic, we've got bus lanes now to make it even worse. Here we have ourselves a beautiful looking bus lane. Got the bus stop in here to pick up passengers. That's how things should work, but doesn't work thousands of times a day when it gets obstructed by vehicles that use it when they shouldn't be. Even bikes in the bus lane are a problem, and the city allows this to happen. And this is kind of ridiculous because if the city were to keep the bus lanes clear, they could also be used by emergency vehicles that have to get places quickly. But look, see? You got people driving in the bus lane, using it to take shortcuts, using it to get around traffic jams. What a mess. But we allow this because none of these people are getting in trouble for doing it. But it gets even worse because even when the city does crack down and issue fines and tickets to people, nobody pays them. Look at this. They got $1 billion in outstanding fines, revealing that lawlessness isn't just a problem in our criminal underworld. It's a problem pretty much everywhere among all facets of society. And as we'll soon see, yes, rising violence has a lot to do with why there are more reasons for ambulances to go places and try to save people. But when the city fails in its mission to maintain orderly streets, those ambulances cannot do their job, which makes our streets even less safe than they already are, exacerbating the problems our EMS crews face in the first place. And before we get into the crime component of this, realize that any emergency is going to be impeded by lawless streets, even if it's something as simple as traffic violations. If there's some sort of emergency that might not require an ambulance but requires a police car like this one right here, how are they going to get somewhere quickly if there are cars in front of them, if there are cars behind them? This puts the whole city in a worse place. All because none of the people with college degrees who decided to redesign our roads to disincentivize driving, a practice people rely on, never realized this would cause problems that are irreversible. So we now know that shrinking our roads was a bad idea and has led to traffic jams, which increase the wait times for ambulances and are causing shortages. But what about the other problems that are leading to a greater need for emergency services in the first place? What about rising crime? What about rising violence? And is there any connection at all between any of this and the asylum crisis? What about that?
See why people are moving now. It just makes so much sense, man. Your health is so important. And if you have some type of medical emergency, bro, that's even frustrating for the people on the ambulance. I know that used to frustrate me. I would drive, and the worst thing, I wouldn't have to deal with that, but people not trying to get over for you so you could see these lights are on for a reason, bro. I'm trying to get to a medical emergency. Someone needs our assistance badly, bro. We're running lights and sirens. So it's like, but for that would be extremely, because you get into that job to help people, and to know your help is being impeded by traffic, that would annoy me.
So here we are, 8th Avenue, Manhattan, an area of town that many locals have suggested is not exactly as safe as it used to be. This is an area that has a lot of ambulance calls headed to it. Obviously, we're surrounded by them, which puts an incredible strain on emergency medical services. And look at this thing out here. It's parked in the middle of a bike lane. I don't even know how it was able to get in there, but while it's here, it can't be somewhere else. And that's a big problem. And now the question is, what's causing this rise in ambulance calls? Is this related to one specific crisis in our city, or is it a citywide problem happening everywhere?
Data shows that 911 emergencies are continuing to rise each year across the city. Brooklyn has both the highest rate of calls and also the largest increase since 2021. But EMS workers say that there's not enough resources.
So look at that. As bad as 8th Avenue might be with all of the crime and illegal activity taking place here, EMS shortages are actually worse out in Brooklyn, which could be for a couple of reasons. Brooklyn Brooklyn is very large geographically, and if they have similar staffing levels to Manhattan as far as ambulances go, they have further to go between trips. That could be one problem. But what we can tell is that it's not related to the asylum crisis, because if you look at this map here of Brooklyn, all of those red dots are shelters for asylum seekers. There are about as many here as there are in Manhattan, which has 49. Brooklyn's got 48. Excuse me, Brooklyn has 49, Manhattan has 48. But Queens, they've got the most shelters. They've got 69 of them, but that's not where most of the 911 activity is. You'd think that if 911 activity were related to the asylum crisis, there'd be some sort of correlation here, but there isn't. Now, that doesn't mean that just like 8th Avenue here, there aren't occasional 911 calls to areas of town that might have an asylum shelter. This doesn't excuse the presence of gangs in one or two of the shelters that are making things much more dangerous for the people who live there who aren't here to commit crime. But shelters that have been reported as having a lot of gang activity inside of them, there's only 3, maybe 4 in total, and the city has almost 200 facilities like this. The same places are the ones that keep making their way into the news over and over again. But even though there's no connection between that and our ambulance shortage, there is a connection between overall rising crime in this city. And when you've got assaults up 40% over the last 5 years, when you've got the former governor of New York City getting assaulted with his stepson while he's walking his dog down the street, which requires a 911 call and emergency services, taking people to the hospital to get checked out, the problem's pretty clear. It's happening everywhere. In fact, things are particularly bad in certain areas of Brooklyn, like the downtown area, where a McDonald's in a very busy location was on the receiving end of collateral damage from crazy people who decided to use weapons in the middle of the road one afternoon. Criminals who, by the way, were never apprehended. They escaped on foot, which means they're still out there, and that's the issue. These streets are dangerous because we've got bad people walking around on them, fearing absolutely nothing, thinking they can do whatever they want. And lately, there's even been a crime wave involving attacks on elderly New Yorkers. Just senseless, rampant violence out of nowhere, all of it leading to 911 calls. And observers say if we're just going to allow people to get randomly attacked and not catch those people, not stop them, not pass laws that put them in jail, we shouldn't be surprised when we've got ambulances headed out the door every 15 seconds to save somebody.
City data shows EMS response times went up by more than a minute between 2021 and 2023, and the number of ambulances on the road decreased by 11%.
We are budgeted to handle about 4,200 calls a day, and there are days where we are doing 4,500, 46. Sometimes we touch 5,000.
Yeah, there's the issue. Our EMS workers, they're getting thousands of calls a day above the capacity that they're budgeted to handle. No wonder these folks are overworked. No wonder there are shortages. And these calls are happening all over the place, every single neighborhood. This is a city-wide problem. But
I wonder what type of shifts they work then. Because when I did it, I was doing it part-time. So I was working because at the fire department, I did a 24-48. 24 on, 48 off, 24 on, 48 off. And I think, if I recall, because it's been so long, that the ambulance also ran that shifted as well, 24 on, 48 off. But when you were off, you also you carried around a pager, because if the station was empty, you had to come in off. So you were on call. So I wonder how they're handling that. Because you would have a rotation of call days with people. Okay, you're off this day, you're on call this day. You know what I mean? And you're getting paid. But it sounds like to me, if they're they're exceeding well over the amount of calls that they can run, then you're always on call and you're always coming back to the station, bro. That's insane, because that leaves room for you to be tired and make an error in a field where there's no room for mistakes. In that industry, in that field, in that part of public safety, there's very little room for mistakes. You don't need to be making mistakes. That's somebody's life.
funding for our EMS services, hiring more people, staffing more ambulances, that's only part of the problem. Because what good's that going to do if they can't move through traffic and get anywhere? There will always be shortages as long as we have that problem. But we better do something quick, because the folks that are responsible for driving these things and taking care of us in an emergency, they can't be overworked forever if we expect them to work forever, that's for sure.
Employees say salary raises can help.
Give us a reason to stay. Give people a reason to want to join EMS, and then we'll
will fill those spots.
To encourage many.
So there you have it. This all comes down to money. We've got to pay people more if we want to have these things staffed as is. And we spent a whole bunch of money to get to this problem of traffic gridlock, because redesigning all these roads to be narrower and smaller and more congested cost a lot. And we've spent that money. We can't get it back. And now New York finds itself having to make the best of a bad situation, a mess of its own making, so to speak. It's possible for the city to do that, but it's going to require people to get out here and remove cars from the road that are in the way of emergency vehicles. Like if you've got vehicles that are illegally parked, blocking these things from getting to an emergency, every second counts. That shouldn't be tolerated, and if people get fines for doing that, they should have their registration or something voided. There should be real consequences, just like there should be real consequences for those who hurt people and trigger 911 calls in the first place. How bad is the traffic? Give me your honest opinion. You know better than anybody.
It's terrible. It's horrendous.
It's bad?
Sometimes I kind of favor the congestion price.
Have a good one, my friend.
Right.
Take care. Yep. He's right. And as long as our roads remain the way that they are, as congested as they are, eventually there will be public willpower to reactivate congestion pricing, and it's going to happen. Meanwhile, we've got vast, unused pieces of road like these bike lanes and these pedestrian pathways. Look at that. Would it be cheaper in the long run and better for New Yorkers to redesign our streets so that we don't have these problems? Do we need 20 feet of pedestrian space and an extra 10 feet of bike lane space dedicated just for those purposes? But more importantly, should we put the people in jail who are the entire reason 911 keeps ringing in the city? Would that be a good idea? Would that lower our crime rates and our ambulance shortages at the exact same time? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.